So the still warm, but it won't.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, it's Friday. Time for another update. We've actually got three of us here, though I'll only be here for a few moments. Tell us how we sound, or I sound.
Video and sound is good.
Cool. So the reason I'm actually not going to be sitting on this whole thing is because I got to get back to bot testing, which is what I want to talk about. It's actually our top 10-ish item number one. So for some of you who were in Discord last night or saw some of my posts on the forums, we've been kind of focused on bots. We've been focused on bots because it helps us test, break, and fix things, but also because we kind of set a goal. And that goal was 1,000 bots with VFX and animations working perfectly, or working, well enough,
As well as they.
in order to say the date of beta. So as of today, one of those things is absolutely checked off the list, because as of last night and as of this morning, we've had more than 1,000 bots running around with VFX, with animations. Still need to do more work. We're going to talk about that over the next few weeks, just tweaking, adding what we need to add. But folks, let me tell you, we got up to over 2,000 bots again last night with VFX on about 360 of them. They were the firework bots, except this time they're all firing into the sky. So it's kind of cool. I've got some screenshots. We'll pick some out for the update today, so you folks will see what we were showing. But oh my, was that a good sight to see. Ben was here late last night, as was Mark, getting this all working. But it's glorious. I was running around just, like we could on an old video we did, with 1,000 bots happily moving between them. Numbers got up higher, still happily moving between them. Not so happy at 2K, but that's because we had some proxy crashes. The good news is that makes it easy to repro, which is really important. So yeah, great news. The other bit of news, we are hoping to have a test this weekend. That's one of the reasons I'm working now. If this test goes well, then I'm going to have this moved over to fledgling and try to have fledgling open this weekend for our alpha testers. And if that goes well, betas, you'll be able to come in next week. Regardless, what I want to run next week is another big bot test with you backers. So we're going to be asking you guys who have especially, anything above a 7 series card, 770, should be okay. Not so okay at 2,000, but, hey, that's 2,000. But we want to bring you in. We want to show you some bots running around. We want to show you some, fireworks working again. And, yeah, nothing but good news. So, kind of that's it.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it. I am going to get back to the bot testing. We're at 1,000, which is great. And, I'll let you guys know during the stream if we hit 2K and the proxies don't explode tonight, which would be great. So
I'll look for smoke over by your computer if anything bad happens.
So I'll see some of you hopefully in testing over the weekend, and if not in the forums, and if not, next week. So have a great weekend, everybody. As always, thanks for your support. Thanks for your patience. But we can absolutely say that as of today, the goal of having a working VFX system, working animation system, and 1K, and 1K bots, the 1K bots are there, they're working, they have VFX. Now it's a matter of tweaking the VFX system and adding some more to the animation system, and then all the requirements to tell you folks when we're going to be in beta will be checked off, our list. So that's it. Bye.
They are very excited and request screenshots.
Yeah.
We'll have them.
What I'm doing now.
So it's been busy and fun over the last 24 hours. And I can actually roll into some more details here with the number 1, which covers a lot of the bot stuff. We've been a bit quiet on testing. We've actually been very quiet on testing for the last 3 weeks, and that's because we did a lot of triaging, reworking some code, making it, there was some scene lock code that was written a long time ago that just needed some work. It's now more stable, it runs better, other engineers are less accident prone in using it, so that's all good. We've now moved on to, I think maybe last week we said we needed to get that issue dealt with because it was creating a bunch of asserts. Those asserts were hiding other asserts probably behind them. So this week we've been, several of the engineers have just been running around fixing random asserts, improving things, it's kind of fun because in like code chat you'll see people saying like, oh, I found a thing, we should fix this. So it's been a lot of just kind of fixing and cleanup. Right now the really cool thing is just as a team effort we've gotten it to a point where I think it was, what does Mark put in here? Last night was about 2.1 bots, 2.1 thousand bots, 360 archers and 1,800 fighters with over 200,000 particles per second. Until we hit about 1,800 bots in a small area, the game was quite playable on Mark's rig, which was at the time running a 970. So the cool thing here is not only are we getting back to the numbers that we had at the end of last year, but we've also got the particle system on top of it. We're using a lot more abilities and we're using items as well. So they're actually querying, I pull an arrow, I shoot, and then I get another arrow out of my inventory. So there's a lot of new things that have kind of come on top of this. There's more terrain performance changes from Brad. We're moving into new features at this point. So hopefully, depending on how today goes and how stable things are, we'll try and get you guys in for the weekend. This will also be not only show and tell, but just kind of checking on things to let us know what asserts that you find. If you do get any, let us know if you get any crashes or anything, because we're still tracking stuff down. So it's not going to be a super. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I'm absolutely certain everything's going to be hunky dory right now. But the great thing is Mark's. I mean, I can still see it running over there. The build with fireworks, and I don't know how many hundreds of bots are on there right now, running still smoothly. So that's pretty fantastic. And when I was telling my dad the other night that we were up to 2.1, he said, "What's that? What does another game like yours normally run?" And I told him around 200 would be playable, maybe on another similar game.
Depends on the game.
Yeah. So, pretty freaking cool. Let's move on to number 2. Sorry, I didn't even really preface this. We're starting the top 10-ish. There's 13 items. Zone portals. Ben brought up a clarification, which I'll have to add in later. Colin's working on, or currently in review, Colin's worked on tech to make it so that the portals that you will take to bounce around the world, for right now during beta, are will have a visual component to them. So when the destination zone is no longer active, that VFX will turn off, and that will give you a good indication that that one's not usable. And this is going to be really important for beta when we need to direct players to specific zones for specific types of testing. You want to hit number 3?
I don't know. Do I? What is this?
Do you want me to just go through them? I
Yeah,
kind of
you gave
grabbed
this
Ben
to me like 5 minutes ago. I
I
don't
grabbed
know
Ben
what
at the
the
last
episode-
minute. So I'll just go through these. Ben can help with design questions and things. So number 3, placing items on buildings. So one of the things you're going to need to be able to do is place your Scorpions or any other siege engine up on top of our buildings. So that's required a little bit of tech just to make sure that you can actually do so. Typically they were snapping to the terrain instead. So now buildings will support being able to place them up on the walls and rain bloody death on your foes.
What happens when you destroy the blocks from under the siege engine?
Then I would imagine your siege engine falls.
Does
Good,
it?
good design question for a follow-up for Matt. Let's see, number 4, random crafting events. So I'm going to get a little bit more clarification. Ben was bringing up a question about this. Christina, unfortunately, was sick today, so I may have to simplify the wording in here. The gist of it, as I understand it, is now when crafting items, we have the ability to place random stat changes in there, and by random I mean design figures out what that random actually means. But it, as I understand it, it will be not the same item every single time the event occurs that it's crafted. So you can have slightly different stats on things. But I want to get more clarification on it before I say anything else. Tech, inventory UI. So one of the things we were working on, and maybe several weeks ago we gave you guys screenshots of, was an inventory UI. That's been in the game for, God, weeks are flying by. Did we put that in this week or was it last week? I think it was the end of last
I
week.
think it was in last week's top
Yeah.
10. So.
Yeah, so last week we put that in. Since then, we've been hitting AJ, and with JB's help, has been getting rid of certain issues, just where you very obvious ones that would, I want my window to go away and go to a different UI element, and that wasn't working. So right now he's working on performance and cleanup on it. But it functions. You can use the paper doll, put your weapons on and off. There's filtering. It's pretty cool. It's actually really fun. JB plays so many different games that he has a very good idea of what he wants to do with the UI and all the functionality that it does, and then just works with everybody else to get something in place. Inventory item material tags. So this still needs some work, but it's part of it has been completed, and what this will allow us to do is to tag different items with different tags for sound, so that when you make a pair of a chainmail shirt or a pair of leather shoes, DB can assign, in this case as a good example, the correct footstep sounds to those items. So like I said, there's still a little bit more work to do on it on Christina's side for items, but when that gets in, then you should hear different types of footsteps as an example based on what you have. I think the second pass is going to entail more work around kind of a collection of what are all the items you have on you, so that we can maybe, I know DB has done things where he's mixed like, oh, I have a plated boot, but I'm wearing a lot of leather, so he'll mix those two sounds together for player movement, not just the footsteps. So that'll be part of a later pass. Mines. So I started this off saying we've gone a bit mine crazy, mainly because I think we've talked about it for about 3 weeks now. I think this is the third. Mainly in that we wanted to have a lot of different pieces. This is basically just like a Lego set. So I handed off more pieces to Dion to work on, and so what she's been doing is propping them out and setting up something like tight and wide and tall and short spaces. And right now she's got, I don't know, 15-20% left of the rooms just to continue propping out wood boards, rocks, chains, lanterns, things like that. And then once that's finished, John has a big, it's kind of like a dragon, snake, worm kind of fossil thing that goes in a room that goes down a spiral that actually looks really cool, and we'll have a screenshot of that in the update today. And then he's going to hide in the Depths-inspired shrine, which we put a screenshot in last week, inside of that. And so my hope is next week we can get a zone with this in there up, so you guys can just run around in it and get a feel for what we're looking at for mines right now. And then what we'll do is we'll continue working on pieces, hand them off into right now the whole thing is just one big piece of art. So what we'll do is we'll start breaking them up. We'll start working on materials, material variations, new little ideas and things, so that any one hull segment we have different pieces, and then we'll come up with some unique ideas so that when you do get lost in there or turned around, you might go, oh, here's that giant dragon skull. I already passed this before. So fun things like that. And I've actually even told Dion, you know, are you getting tired of this? Do I need to give you a day's break, work on something else? She was like, no, I'm really excited. I have all these ideas. And I've told her, I said, write all the ideas down because you're going to come up with them faster than you can build them. Let's see. Moving on. Scorpion anime. Mark's yelling over there. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Yelling in a good way, just loud. Scorpion animation. So Ben has assisted John in updating the geometry for the scorpions so that the mechanisms for, I don't know, we're calling it drawing in this case, drawing back, drawing, locking, and firing the actual scorpion siege engine looks like it would actually work. Scott then took that, did a quick rig of it, and one of our next steps is to hook the player animations to the siege animations that all use the ability system. Right now we're going for kind of two animations. One is a longer animation that's kind of, the plan right now is for a setup. So the character will actually go through all the different pieces, unlocking, loading, drawing, loading. I'm doing it out of order. Unlocking, drawing, loading, firing. As one long animation, and then what we've done is we've got just one quick 2-second animation, mainly to stress test the systems, so we want to be able to fire these things really fast. That's more of a beta 1 thing. As we get more into less testing and more into the numbers behind the design, then we'll start doing things where you go through the full loop setting this thing up. Okay, one-handed sword animation. So Sandra and Scott have been going through the litany of items needed for one-handed mace and sword combinations, and that required the upper body attacks, the deflects. Scott's been working on the locomotion set, the jumping, and Sandra is currently working on the death animations right now as well. And next week we'll put those guys in, and then we will move on to switching the sword and the mace to the opposite hands, and then move into shields and spears and daggers, and probably axes. Environment assets. So I wrote this in, not from my perspective, that I was working on a bunch of different assets, trying to go through all the environment assets that we have and find the assets we need to create for the realm variations when a realm takes over an area, so it visually changes and looks like that realm is taken over. And not only am I reorganizing the old assets, but I'm I'm making a new sheet, a new Photoshop file for Michelle to kind of art direct this, so that not only does everything in a spreadsheet have an entry, but everything visually in Photoshop has an entry, so that she can go through and go, okay, let's use this one and this one together, and let's make a new one for Vikings, let's do this for the TDD. And while I'm doing that, I've just started making some new textures. And we're doing the same thing with some of the trees and stuff, adding in more variation and more, broken logs and things like that. This won't be as biomes, I can't say it that way. Ben pointed out that a biome is typically a very large area. Kind of like the east coast of the United States is more of a term for biome, and I think in games we've been calling a biome more like a visual segment within that. So I'm trying to approach this as more holistically. Instead of just making a very specific visual, we're trying to make everything so that combinations of things will work well together, which will make it not only easier for someone who's not an artist with a very specific vision, who's going to be creating assets all at once, to make different permutations of how these things assemble. And one of the things I've noticed is that, like, if Ben goes in and just says, oh, I'm going to put this tree here and this grass and this rock, he will make things that I had never really planned on doing, or Michelle had never thought of concepting. So hopefully this second pass will not only allow people to build faster, but it'll give more visual variation in the world without us having to create a lot of unique assets that are very specific to an area. So that's kind of a fun thing that I've been doing. And like I said, at the same time, if I get a chance, I'm like, oh, let's throw some more textures in. And right now I'm focusing on just setting up terrain, and then it'll be grass and then trees and ferns and rocks and all different kinds of stuff as we just kind of keep going through it. And I actually added a note in here. This will probably always be a work in progress all the way up into beta 1 as we just, whatever time's available, keep adding more things in. Fairly large one next around VFX and SFX. Ben is working through the melee archetype component breakdown. This includes breaking things down, not only the visual and auditory expectation from a design standpoint, but also the phases in which we should build everything. So Ben will go through and say the archers were still a very sound example of, okay, a generic arrow flying through the air sound and a generic particle trail for the arrow. And then once we get those in so that it just kind of facilitates combat testing faster, then we go into, okay, now I'm a barbed arrow with a bleed effect on it, and we start adding in all these permutations as we go. So he is remaining very ahead of Mike and DB and is working on the melee archetype group. DB is currently working through arrow permutations. He's adding in a bunch of generic sounds and then going back over those later to add more specifics. So the idea here is that when you shoot a specific arrow type, you should be able to kind of tell or hear that what is coming at you or what is flying through the air. They're not all sharing one generic arrow sound. Mike is kind of doing the same thing DB is doing. He's creating a whole bunch of just generic use starter assets. So for Mike, a lot of what it is setting up the specific math of how particles are going to move, when they're going to spawn, where they're going to spawn on the character. And once he gets all those things laid out, then he can start working on all the permutations, and it goes a lot faster at that point. So for a little while here, you'll see us kind of just slowly adding in just generic sounds and stuff, and then we will just keep rolling into more and more specific permutations. And hopefully what we'll start doing is just giving you guys lists of things where to expect particles and sounds, and what we want you to pay attention to. Concepting. There's 13 of these. Michelle finished off the Tuatha and Arthurian realm portal variations for realm influence. So these there's one portal marker for each realm, with the idea that these go to the specific safe islands for beta 1, where we don't want an Arthurian to run all the way across the map because he sees a portal off in the distance only to get closer and find out that it specifically goes to a TDD spot he can't go to. So we have very specific visuals for these, and since some of these will go from a contested island to a safe island, that contested land, because it can be taken over by the opposing realm, we have a visual representation on that portal. And Michelle has likened it to a bit of graffiti almost on the the markers. So I think we're gonna have all of screenshots in today's update, but like the TDD one has, like, when the Vikings take it over, they've put some shields on it and stuff, and there's flags on it for the Arthurian. So it's very clear that another realm has been around this area and almost tagged the item. Last but not least, our icons. So James has had a few different projects going on this week, one of which was adding more icons in for inventory. Now that we have a working inventory, all the icons needed to exist, so he finished those off for now until we get into more crafting needs. Oh, and that's literally it. That's actually not literally it. There's plenty of other things going on. These
What
are just
else
the
is going
highlights.
on?
No, I just read 13 things. I also ran to the store today, grabbed a computer, sent it across the coast, graphics cards, and all different kinds of fun stuff. So yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to play the Q&A intro as we begin the Q&A portion of the update.
Dion, you want to come sit on the couch?
Who are you? Turn the stove off. Did I hear a sock?
Do you like my shirt?
When are this?
Is this my spleen?
Now it is time to answer some questions.
It's not actually true. It's all one piece.
Right now it is, yeah. But that one piece is built from pieces. Those pieces exist. It's just right now for putting it in the game. Oh, we're back on. Ask your question. Ask your question again, because it wasn't on when you asked the question, I think.
That's fine. We were just talking about how if the mine is going to be built out eventually, where it's modular and you can piece it together. Right now, it's all in a single piece, so that's going to have to be sliced up at some point.
Yeah, and
in the
that's
future.
literally for speed of prototyping, so that Dion can assemble it in Maya, versus and then import one file. Versus how many pieces do you have right now? Like 30 or something? You got a lot of pieces.
Set of pieces.
Yeah, a piece that you would do individually.
A lot.
Okay, a lot is the answer. So basically, instead of her updating every single piece and then placing every single piece every time, right now, just to see if we're on the right track, if this works, it's all just built in Maya really quick, and all the visual geometry is just duped and added in for collision. Later, we'll be doing LODs and specific collision, and we'll be adding, once it's in the game, then we'll add that, we'll do things like props, like boxes and stuff that are not the kind of tertiary elements, like just wood support beams and chains and spider webs and stuff. All of that will go in the base model, and once it's in the game, we can add in boxes and other fun things in there.
All right. Shall we get to the questions?
Sure. And just to preface this, production, art, design.
Yes. Ask Ben the design questions and address your art and production questions to Tyler. So, Sacrix asks, what is going to be the new path system? How will stat gating work? For example, a more agility or dex two-handed user versus a pure strength two-handed user. How will it differentiate what skills they get? Is it going to be restrictive to weapons now?
So that was more than one question, I think. Basically, the way that stats work in gating unlocks is that certain skill parts require certain stat levels in order to use. Also, certain weapons require certain stat levels to use. So if you don't meet the stat requirements for a weapon, you won't be able to use that weapon. Even subdivisions into sub-weapon types might have stat requirements such that you can't use even a type of weapon or any of the skills that go with that weapon until you meet a certain stat threshold. As far as the skill parts themselves, if you don't meet the requirements, obviously you can't use that skill part, but as you progress further up the stat progression in a given stat, there will be more skill parts that have higher requirements of that stat. So if you go up, say agility versus dexterity, right? Agility will unlock certain things, dexterity will unlock certain things, certain thresholds of combinational X amount of agility plus Y amount of dexterity will unlock certain things. And so depending on what your stat distribution is, specifically in melee between strength, agility, and dexterity, you will get different access to different things than someone else who distributed their points differently would have access to. But that's not also to say that if you had the same distribution, you would have the same skills either, because you have to pick from the list of the many things that there will be, which ones you actually want to get from your trainer and actually advance through use. So if you have the same stats, you might pick different skill parts anyway, and that would still lead you to have some differences between someone else who had the same stat focus but just chose different skill parts than you did along the same progression track.
Zwanda Leo asks, to Ben, which class archetype will have the highest player skill ceiling? Mark told me to ask you a few weeks ago.
I see. Which specific class or which archetype?
We'll have the highest
Which
skill
class
ceiling?
archetype?
Oh, okay.
What is skill ceiling?
So
in
skill
this case?
ceiling, okay, so I guess if you're not too far into gaming terms, skill ceiling means for any given character, you sort of have a floor of like, how difficult is this even to get into?
Oh, okay.
But you also have a skill ceiling of like, if you have a ridiculous amount of skill,
Yeah.
some classes, when you get to a certain skill threshold, it doesn't matter how much better you are, that class
Yes.
or that character
I'm
like just
following.
isn't going to get any better. The performance of that character isn't going to increase no matter how good you are beyond a certain point. Some characters have a ridiculously high skill ceiling, which means if your skill is really, really, really good,
Yeah.
if you get better,
You can take
that
advantage
character
of it.
will still perform better.
Yeah.
And so, like, some characters are said to have a low skill ceiling, which means, you know, if you get up to a certain point, if you're not, you know, that skilled of a player, you're still able to make that character perform about as optimally as it can, which is good for players who don't necessarily have very high skill.
Yeah, that's
or,
my Friday
or are
night
focused on
Jack and Coke character.
Yeah, that would
Just
be
relax
good for your
and just, yeah.
your methodology
Yeah.
of playing games. And some people who just, you know, don't have the time to dedicate to the games,
Yeah.
don't want to practice and get like
Now
really,
I'm
really
totally
good.
in sync. What's the answer?
So for our game in particular, the characters that are going to have a higher skill ceiling in general tend to be the hybrids, because you have more to keep track of. So say like the Devout archetype, right? They're sort of healer mage hybrids. You're going to have to be able to keep track of your group and make sure that you're keeping people alive, and at the same time be putting out damage and balancing between your damage and your healing, because they're going to have something to do with each other depending on which class of which realm you're playing. So being able to balance between those two things and do them both well and being able to do them both simultaneously, I think is going to be where the highest skill ceiling comes in, because if you're able to do it, you know, a sort of average job at it, you'll be able to do, you know, some good healing, some good damage, and support your group and keep everything going. But if you're able to do it like really optimally and really well, your performance will just continue to go up and up to where the players who are really good with those classes are going to easily outshine the ones that are just kind of average.
Elam DK has a production question for you, Tyler. From 0 to 100%,
We don't get those often.
how close is beta? Yes, you do.
I'm not going to talk about it. We'll talk about it when Mark does his where we're at.
Odilvik asks, will weapon sizes be static or change in size relative to the wielder?
I think that's an art question. I think they do right now, don't they?
Yeah,
Like,
well,
the
right
Lutrapan
right
uses-
now they do just scale. There's a universal scaler on the Lukrapan. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what we want to do is to have a different recipe for something that a Lukrapan would wield versus what a human would wield. So it may take more of an, to build it, but it may also, I don't know how far you guys are planning on taking
Yeah,
this
so
with the
so
stats
we
on the item.
so we eventually do want to, in terms of gameplay and crafting and all that, have weapons and armor of different sizes. So say your giants are going to have very large things. Your smaller races like Lutrapans and Divergers and stuff are going to have smaller weapons, and that's just a different recipe and it's a different item. So taking that same item and trying to equip it to the opposite, where you have a giant wearing a small thing is not going to fit, a very small character wearing a giant thing is not going to fit. But the scaling of the items themselves, assuming you can equip it, I think. So say like the
It might be-
Sturms and humans are slightly different sizes, so
Yeah.
their hands gripping the item, I think they'll scale a little bit, but you'll have to have something of that class.
Yeah,
like,
we've
if
talked
it's like
about-
medium size.
we've
then
also
it'll
talked
scale
about
a little
just-
bit within that size.
Ultimately, design is going to dictate this ultimately, because the way we're going with our game and the stats and the crafting system, we've had conversations where we've talked about like, oh, if a giant makes an axe, is it a two-handed axe if a Lucre Pan uses
Yeah, we've
it?
talked a little bit about
And
that.
would there
I'm
be
not
some
sure
kind
if
of
that's something
gating
we're gonna be
mechanism
able
to
do.
decide? Well, yeah, it's a gating mechanism whether or not you have the stats to even be able to use it. And it may even just be a one-handed axe for a giant because
Yeah.
he's got the strength stat to wield this thing around, and
Yeah,
a
like,
Lucre
it would
Pan
have to
might
have
need something different.
Yeah, it would have to have multiple requirements. It'd basically have to have two items built into the same item, and you'd have to be able to equip it in two different ways, and it would have to pass the requirement for one or the other
Yeah,
of those
I
in
really
order to
like
get
the
it to
idea,
work.
but design will dictate it. You want to jump in?
I was just going to say we are in the process of pushing a version over to fledgling now.
Okay,
So
and then we'll do an office
testing
test.
was great. Got up to 1500s, about 1580 before one of the proxies started having issues. So yeah, all good.
That's fantastic. Okay.
Very happy, and Andrew's already got a code or a speed up for next week. So
On which part? Where's the speed up hit?
the game.
Particle.
Actually,
Yeah,
the
thanks.
game.
Particles,
Game.
character animations. What? I was just curious.
terrain.
Okay.
So yay.
Cool.
Okay, back I go.
Sorry about the camera work there, folks. It seems to be stuck.
Oh, that was awesome. That was like, what was that movie from J.J. Abrams?
Any movie.
Which one? Oh,
yeah.
8
one with the
millimeter.
lens flare?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the camera.
Yeah, it turned like a quarter turn, and then it was like, nope, no more.
Yeah, I think
Alright.
I actually do want to expound just one or two sentences more on that, because this is a lot of the really fun stuff that we have a lot of work to do with the crafting system. We have a lot of work to just saying that, one race can use something, one race can use something. If a race uses it, this is going to happen. There's a lot of code work that has to happen to make all these different things fit together and work. So there's a lot of kind of cruft that we would have to get to, and by cruft I mean only in comparison to the outcome of this question, where we'd have these really fun ideas, and there's still a lot of design work that would have to happen. But I would love to do something like that. We would. If design can make it work, if the numbers work out, and we can let you, if an item is really big and we don't scale it down to your character, and if we do support specific recipes for a big one or a small one of the same sword, and if the stats can be balanced out based on that, and
Yeah, like I don't think it's as much of a design question as you think it is, because
Okay.
you would basically just have two stat blocks. It'd be like having two items with the same physical representation, right? So it would be like.
but would the item have
if
the same stats?
Well, it would have different stats, because
Okay.
if it's it's a Luthorpan sword and it's a Fearbog dagger,
Yeah.
right? It's the same item. Like if you traded that item between those two characters, they would
Okay.
both be able to equip it, but they would have different stats because it has a different use to those two characters.
Yeah,
right? So it's,
I would love to do that.
yeah, we could figure a way for this to happen, but it's like not a high priority given all the other.
Yeah,
things
yeah.
we're gonna have to
There's
do
a
with
lot of
weapons
other
and items.
things. There's a lot of other really cool stuff that we are planning on, that we are currently in the process of doing with the crafting system. The crafting system at this point is far cooler than we were originally going to do for the first version of beta. There's so much more that we have in there now that we didn't have before, and then we haven't even hit the visual part of it, which will be post beta 1. It's a much lengthier discussion where we're talking about visual representation, not only of the materials that you use to craft, say, a sword or a piece of armor, but also the qualities as well. So there's a lot of fun stuff we're thinking of.
Sacrex has 2 questions crammed into one. Is it time for CSE to make a combat foundation principle to hold true more to the vision given out in BSC days? How do you plan to stick to this while juggling expectations with iteration of design?
For writing new foundational principles for the game, you would really have to talk to Mark. As far as sticking to the expectations that we have, there's a lot of expectations that different people have based on the past games that they've played, based on their understandings of the things that we've posted here and there, but it's really hard to get into the exact specifics of that just in conversation. What we really need to do is actually get into our first version of beta, let people actually play with it and see the way that it works in the game, and then we can start iterating and working on it from there. Now, as far as like remaining consistent from that point on, as we move through continued iteration and development towards actually releasing the game, the degree of variance that you perceive along the path that gets from that point to the end is going to be based on your frame of reference. So a lot of things
that's
are
where I
going to
would've answered
change going forward through all of that process, as far as how much damage things do, how quickly characters move, the targeting system that we're using for manual aiming for our ranged weapons. A lot of things are going to be shifting around here and there. We've talked about if our body part targeting system, for example, doesn't work out to be something that we can balance out and have be fun and communicated adequately through our UI and visual effects and things, that maybe that's something that doesn't even survive that entire process. So there might be some very major changes to the fundamental way that characters deal and receive damage in the game going through all this. So there's a lot of potential to change, and that's something that we've been very, I think, upfront about all along this process, where we've talked about how things are termed BSC because they're kind of these crazy ideas where it's not for sure that it's even going to work, and we're going to try it anyway, because if some of these ideas do work, then it's great because it provides a lot of differentiation between this game and other games, and makes have a new experience for people who have played sort of games that have had the same thing over and over and over again. And this is going to be something that, at least in some ways, we hope, if some of these ideas make it through all the way to launch, that this game is going to be different, and that difference is going to make the game more interesting and challenging to learn and deal with, and hopefully fun to stick around longer than it would be if we just copied what other games have done in the past, just verbatim.
Yeah, doing all this stuff differently creates a certain amount of inherent risk expectation, I guess, just where we're going to end up versus where we started, how people feel about it, what works, what doesn't work. I mean, I've worked on many different titles that start out very different from the way they end, and that's usually after a lot of player feedback.
Motogoro asks, are Vikings going to have more races? Maybe Dark Elves?
Oh yeah, I mean not Dark Elves. That's not what I'm answering to. Yeah, we have more races planned. We part of what we wanted to do with the new animation system was to support being able to add and append things like tails or wings and bones, and we have plans that are beyond just humanoid characters.
Well, you've seen some of those already, right? Because they're on the website. They're just
Oh
not
yeah. We had to pull back on some of that stuff just for art concerns and prototyping everything. But yeah, Mark is one of the more imaginative people I've worked with, who can just suddenly be like, okay, I've got an idea for a new race. And one of the things we want to do is come up with some really fun stuff. Like, I love the Strim. I want to do John's really excited to do a second pass on the Strim and bring his own flair to it. Sturm? I'm going to call him Strim. Is it S-T-Y? Sturm?
S-T''RM.
Sturm? I said Strim until Max got here. Anyway, we've got a lot of the giants too, and one of the things we don't want to do is just have every race be a permutation of a human. We'd like to have humanoid, and one of the things, some things that you think would be simple, like the chicken legs, meaning that the leg from the hip goes forward to the knee, back to the ankle, down to the ball of the foot, and out to the toes, is very different and creates added work to do all the animations for the lower body movements as well. So there's a lot of considerations, but yeah, we've got a bunch of guys sitting in the wings. And I think actually, in today's update we're going to have a little bit of inspiration for the Ulfhednar. Is that okay?
The Ulfhednar.
Ulfhednar.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I work on my techniques sometimes. The Ulfhednar. We're going to have a little bit of art in the update today.
That's exciting. Sacrix would like me to tell Ben, thanks for that dose of design on Speed, the best one by far. I appreciate the depth, especially after writing 5 pages on it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Ben's actually got a good one, and I was reading today.
I was just going to say he's going to like that one a lot less if he liked the last one. So.
You mean the one for this month?
Yeah.
This one's
it's just completely different.
Technical,
than
yeah.
that. So if that's what you were looking for more of, this is not it. But
I hope
maybe you'll like it anyway.
I hope people appreciate with the newsletters and all the transparency. I mean, when I started making games, like none of this whole conceptual open office and letting you know what's going on and people working with developers, that just didn't exist. And I would have killed to have this much information when I was younger.
Skylar asks, will resource costs be instant pay at the beginning of the cast, or more of a gradual decrease over the channel duration?
They are instant pay up front. So when you have blood costs and stamina costs, as soon as you push the button, those are assessed to your character, which means that you cannot start casting a spell, pay nothing, cancel the spell, and then do something else. So if you're going to try to do, fake casts or whatever to try to
Fake.
draw out a counter from an opponent, that's going to cost you. So you're not going to be able to do that for free.
And we love working on the newsletters for you, Odovic, saying we love the newsletters. Sigovirial asks, when you get killed, will you enter a downed state or anything similar like in Guild Wars 2, or will you just die?
You
What's
should
the
definitely... Oh, you don't even know
I
about
don't
this?
remember. I don't remember the
So,
down state.
once upon a time in the land of Guild Wars 2, your character died, but instead of being dead, you just sort of fell over, and then you got a new bar of things that you could push, and after a certain amount of time, you would either fight your way back to being fully alive,
This was when it first
or
came out,
someone
right?
would come up and do a finishing move on you, which would cause you to die. Or
Yeah,
you
I
could
vaguely
be
remember
like
this.
resurrected by someone just walking up from your faction.
That's
walking
right,
up
yeah,
and
someone could
helping
come
you,
over and help you, yeah.
to get back up and not
I
be
remember that now.
dead. That's not in our to-do list at present. There's been a lot of controversy, even in the Guild Wars 2 community and elsewhere about how down states are looked down upon. We're more of a traditional MMO, so we're more based on the way that dead means dead. We've got some things that we're not quite ready to talk about as far as how to resurrect people who have died and how to respawn when you've died, because we've got some technical things to look into to get that all figured out. But right now we don't have plans for an actual down state where you die but you're not actually dead and your character is still able to participate in fighting and continue on.
It was a fun new idea for a while. It was just had issues.
If you say so.
Well, for me at least, like I said, I'm kind of the rum and coke, relax, and I was like, oh, well, this is new and interesting.
Sacrix asks, how are you planning to go about AoE damage? Will it be fall off? And specifically, how will AoE melee work with this system of micro-reactive with prep systems, etc.?
Sacrix with the multi-part questions.
See, the problem is you keep answering all of them. You're not.
Just stop
He
answering
knows.
them.
He knows he can get them all in there.
Well, so as far as just AoE in the first place, right? Anytime you have effects that target more than one character, they can either do their full effect to all of the characters, they can do their effect spread amongst the characters, they can do an effect that increases based on the number of characters. There's all kinds of ways that you can scale these effects. And these effects can be, not only just an area of like, here's a space, everyone within that space is now affected. They can be effects that bounce from one character to another. They can be effects that just affect the nearest X number of characters to a specific location, rather than doing a sphere and grabbing them all. There can be a lot of ways to go about doing these different types of effects. So the way that they will scale is different. The way that they will pick who they're affecting is different. We will have to do some evaluation on some of these. We aren't planning on just having a pure hard limit on everything that is, everything is a sphere AoE, everything hits only up to 6 targets, everything does equal amounts to all of those 6 targets, and that's the way Area of Effect works for our game. We're going to try to incorporate a lot of different behaviors to different types of effects so that, bouncing chain lightning works one way, burning fire on the ground to stay out of works another way, different crazy druid void effects work a different way, and so there's going to be different scaling and different multi-target mechanics for different abilities. So you won't necessarily see a lot of consistency in the way that all of that works. Now, as far as melee attacks, what was the specific part of that question?
Specifically, how will AoE melee work with the system of micro-reactive with prep systems, etc.?
I'm not sure. Maybe you can rephrase that in some way. The way that Melee works is that there is a spatial query that happens. So when you swing your sword, it affects the nearest target in front of you. It prioritizes the player that you have targeted. So if you have a player targeted and there are 2 players in front of you that you could hit, it will hit the player that you have targeted. If you haven't got anyone targeted, it will pick the nearest one to the center of your aim. And so that doesn't really interact with the way that there's preparation time or the way that reactives work. I'm not sure what the relationship is between there that you're trying to understand.
All right. Rephrase that more clearly, Sacrex, and we'll come back around to it. Sir not appearing in this film asks. Great name, by the way. Let's say a friend joins the game late, 2 months for argument's sake. How long or difficult would it be for them to get caught up so that you're able to group with them productively?
The ideal answer for that we're shooting for is 0. So we don't have a level progression in our game. You won't have to go through and start at level 1, get up to level 60, and then start playing the game with your friends. The idea is, much like if you guys have played PlanetSide 2, as soon as you start playing the game, you are playing the game with the other people who are playing the game. There will be a bit of a tutorial. Our systems are, fairly complicated in some ways, so that you might have to go through a brief period of time where you're trying to understand, how do I construct my skills off of this builder which has component parts? How do I go and deal damage to things when they have all these different body parts and I have to select targeting? How does disruption work, where I try to do interrupts or things keep attacking me and my skills stop because they're interrupted by different things? So there will be basically a new player experience tutorial to get you into that if you just don't understand how to play the game. But assuming you have friends to help you understand, that experience isn't very long, and you can sort of skip over it if you're not really interested, so that when you get to the actual game itself, you're not going to be way behind in terms of levels, because there aren't any. You're not going to be way behind in terms of gear, because the gear progression isn't that long, and mostly has to do with specializing into being either super light and agile and super heavy and defensive. So you'll start out somewhere kind of in the middle of that, although there is a little bit of vertical progression. That's not meant to be enough to stop you from going out and joining a group with basically anyone else who's playing the game and participating. So if you are, let's say, a healer, and you're going to join a group with players who've been playing the game for a couple months already, that's fine. You won't be as specialized and a little bit less powerful than a healer who's already been playing for 2 months and just kind of figured out what they want their build to specialize towards, and has a little bit of power progression because they have gotten some better items that have gotten some increased stats that have allowed to pick up some new skill parts. But you will be doing a good enough job, and we're trying to keep the power curve low enough that it's not really going to be that detrimental to have new players joining along with you and participating in the game, because we need new players coming into the game 2 months, 6 months, 12 months after launch, and getting into the fight, because there's nothing else to do but go out and participate in the RVR game. So there's not hey, I'm going to go off and do dungeons for 60 levels and then I'll go do
Then I can play
RVR.
with my friends.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. It's immediately you're part of the game that everybody else is a part of. So we need you to be able to join in, and we need the power curve and the power gap between absolute new player in starter gear and maxed out player with best in slot, every slot, best skill, optimal build, to be not far enough that those two characters can't play with each other and against each other.
All right, we've got a question on the YouTube chat. Anilar Gamir asks, Tyler question. One of my biggest pet peeves in MMORPGs is having a few art styles of armor or weapons, and many colors to differentiate the quality of gear. Will we see this in Camelot Unchained?
A limited number of art styles and a lot of color choices.
To differentiate the gear.
One of the things we're going to do is we're going to have each one of the realms are each going to have their different looks. We've added in other things like kind of the ideas of basic gear and fancier gear. We've also added in, like for the TDD, quartz as well. And part of this also comes down to the amount of time that it takes to actually create all the art assets. So
Don't forget the dyeing system.
yeah, that's why I said lots of colors. So we're going to have, yes, there is a dyeing system. Probably what we'll...
I don't know if you guys can hear Mark whispering.
Yeah.
out there.
So So
I'm waiting for,
basically,
Franklin to build.
yes and no. You're going to have, I'm
Oh,
going to
good.
coin Mark's term here. There's a certain number of assets that we're going to be able to build at any given time. Based on those assets, and by that I mean like the models and the areas which can be dyed differently. Each one of those will then have a visual representation by the materials that it's made of and then the dyeing after the fact. So each model will have just a myriad of possibilities that you can do with how that piece looks. Those styles should at least be restricted in some regards so that the realm is identifiable when you see a character running around. So in that way there will be some restriction on it. Within that, we would like to have a bunch of different ideas like, what was the Mark brought up the quartz, you brought that up, didn't you? The idea of quartz, like winter, autumn, spring quartz, and that will define the look and style of some of the TDD outfits. We've also got the idea of things that are, say, less combat ready. Michelle would like to have some, fancy gear for running around that doesn't look like you're going into combat. So in some ways, in some ways, the biggest restriction on the visuals of the armor is going to be based on making sure that it looks like it belongs to a specific realm. Ultimately, that should serve the design of the game, that you are able to not be surprised when someone comes around the corner and is charging at you that you don't know what realm they are. You don't know how heavy or how light the gear is. The idea is that we want a bit of what you see is what you get, that you should understand and be able to plan accordingly when you're going into combat with people. So that's probably where the biggest restriction is going to be. After that, you can get a myriad of colors, materials on all those pieces. So it'll just be a matter of maintaining. Right now our big focus is making sure that, okay, the TDD have a style, the Vikings have a style, and the Arthurians have a style. Once that's really locked down and we can actually see that it works, then we can start making permutations of that.
All right, going in order here. Mia Tullis asks, will players be encouraged to acquire different armor sets and weapon types? Or will this kind of switch be prohibitively expensive and time-consuming?
I think it depends on how you mean that question. So you probably won't want to be changing out your entire set of armor while you're in the middle of fighting someone, but you will want to be able to collect different armors and weapons for different circumstances. So say you're in a siege battle, right? You probably aren't going to have to move around a whole lot. You're not running out over open country where you're concerned about how fast you're moving. You're going to be primarily concerned about keeping yourself alive. So you can wear heavier armor in that conditions so that you can basically stay where you are, inside of a building or outside of a building, fighting back and forth, dealing a lot of damage, receiving a lot of damage, and surviving better. But if you're out roaming around and you're concerned about running across other groups and searching across large areas for objectives or for enemies, you're probably going to want to be more agile than you would be if you were fighting in a siege battle or in an enclosed space. So you'll want to have lighter armor for that case. You might even want to have different armors depending on what realm you expect to go up against, because, if Arthurians have fire damage for a lot of their attacks, for their mages specifically, then you might want to have gear that is heavily fire resistant to deal with that. But if you're going to fight against TDD, they have druids, and druids deal void damage, then you might not care about your fire resistance as much. So there will be, I think, a lot of motivation to collect different gear sets and have different armors for different circumstances, but not necessarily to be switching them out like in the middle of a fight, because that's not going to be something that we're going to allow you to do immediately, and it contributes to your encumbrance. The more things you have that go above your carrying capacity, and armor is fairly heavy as things go, so you probably don't want to carry an extra full suit of armor on your character as you're running around.
I see Sacrix had a clarification from the earlier question. I was basically asking about reactionary melee that they wanted from game systems. Will that apply to melee AoE also, like the floaty runes for ranged and counter skills while watching the gameplay with visualization?
I'm having a hard time understanding that question as well.
All right, further clarification still needed.
There might be.
Use shorter sentences and fewer.
All Mecha Iron Tiger asks, will someone be able to build a character that cannot equip any weapon due to stats?
I don't think so
I don't
because
think
you
No.
start off being able to use weapons
there's no
for,
way.
for basically all characters. The only way would be if we allowed you somehow
To
to
not
like
even
dump your
assign
stats.
stats,
Well,
yeah.
not to
No.
not assign them because you start with them at a certain level.
Yeah.
But if you could somehow lose them, like if you could
Not
dump
to
your
that
stats
point.
while you're in the game,
No,
but it would be
that's no.
very very unlikely that you could do that. Now you can run around without having a weapon. In the game right now, like the empath has a specific component that they get benefits from not equipping a weapon and keeping their hands empty. So there are conditions under which you might not want to have a weapon, but there's not a condition where you can't have a weapon. Like your character is incapable of actually equipping a weapon.
All right, Sacris is another attempt.
Okay.
Will AoE have counterplay like they wanted with other areas of the game?
There we go.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so specifically as far as like melee having counterplay, melee attacks are based on a spatial query, right? So they're basically based on AoE, even if it's numerically capped to a single target, right? So you're still doing a physics event that says who is in front of me, who can I hit, who is my target, get a target based on that, and then the counterplay to that can be things that either redirect that says, okay, we've picked a target out of this spatial query, and then we've tried to affect that target, but that target has an effect on them that says, actually, you are going to be redirected to hitting this other person, assuming they were also in that spatial query. So if you have an ally guarding you who's nearby to you, that they can redirect that attack to them. You can obviously interrupt those attacks. So as far as counterplay goes, if you're doing a melee attack that does an area, and you disrupt that attack before it gets finished because it has a preparation time and it doesn't happen instantly, then that attack won't happen. So there is a counterplay to that where you can interrupt an attack, and like I said, there's also a counterplay to after that attack has actually selected its subject of who it's going to affect, there might be subsequent effects that then make that attack invalid for that target that were previously placed there. So it's sort of a preemptive counter on the subject rather than on the attacker on the source of that attack.
Should we give a 5-minute warning?
Yeah, we've also got to open that up.
Okay. 5-minute warning, and then we're for questions, and then we're going to open up a GIF that was sent to us. Mihuge asks, random question, will snow stick, and will it slow you down?
Will it stick?
I think to the ground. If it snows, does it pile up on the ground?
Yes.
Oh,
We would
yeah,
like to do
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
As part of-
Yeah, that's the thing we can do.
That's on the list of things that we want to happen, just like rain, wind,
Yeah.
anything elemental.
Yeah, we want to do
We wanna
terrain
fit that
effects
into the game.
onto the player and things like. I was even thinking about I talked with Andrew briefly about just dropping the player through the physics system just a little bit so that they would look like they were plowing through leaves or snow or something like that, and then we could just add an effect to that and slow them down. So it is one of the things we'd like to do.
Yeah, weather effects are supposed to be non-cosmetic in that if there's snow, if there's rain, if there's veil storms, other crazy environmental happenings are supposed to actually have an effect on gameplay. So you will see things happening to your character like being slow while you're walking through snow. So it's not just an appearance that just it looks like it's raining, but it doesn't do anything.
Adri Cortesia asks, since you have the UI enemy image feature, what you see is what you get, have you thought about real working mirrors? There are only a few games with really good working ones.
I can tell you why there are very few games, because you're basically rendering everything again inside that mirror. So you're basically taking a big frame rate hit to actually having a working mirror. That I don't really see any reason why we need working mirrors.
I don't know that there's not a clear need for that. Obviously, if you could do it, then we could find some reason to use it. But it's not.
Yeah,
on
if we
our
did any
feature
kind of
list
really
for
cool
users.
spell thing, and like I said, literally the problem is that let's say you create a spell where you create this mirror effect in the world, some kind of portal or something. It is literally drawing everything again that you are seeing in the mirror as you're rendering in the screen. So you're going to get a huge performance hit just doing so. Typically, that's why glass and mirrors and things map a single texture versus doing a constantly updated render on top of them. They do just a rough idea of what the world is inside of them.
And by the way, folks, I'm keeping my eye out for a really great question to end on. Preferably one both of these guys could answer. Odilvik asks, is the long-term plan to make siege engines mobile or static when constructed?
Well,
Yeah, I was gonna say it depends on the engine.
It depends on what it is, right? If you had a static seed ram that you had to wheel up to a door, like, it wouldn't work. So you have to be able to have some types of
A
things.
static siege ram you have to roll.
Yeah, like, how do we build this thing?
Yeah.
It's going to knock down the door, but we can't get it to the door because it doesn't move. So, like, yeah, you have to have certain things, siege rams, towers specifically, that you roll up to the thing that you're attacking and do something with. And then there are going to be other things like trebuchets that, like, are just not going to move, where you have to construct it in place. It's going to only be able to have a certain amount of arc that it can cover, and it's, in order to move it, you have to take it apart, move it, and then put it together somewhere else. So
Yeah, I
there's
mean-
going to be cases for both of those.
The goal is varied siege engines gives you more strategy that you have to plan for in advance and more consequences to your decisions.
Brand asks, Cube lets us build static blocks that then get affected by physics. Will we be able to make physics-based items in the future, like drawbridges or gates?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be able to make them, but they won't be built out of cubes. So if we have like a door, the door will be basically a pre-made piece that Tyler has to make, and
Someone
then
does.
it has an animation where it opens and closes, and so that making that out of cubes, like, it's not technically impossible, but it's kind of outside of the scope of our simulation, because cubes are at a certain scale where they're half-meter blocks, and so if you wanted to make like hinges and things like it, you couldn't
Yeah,
make them out
it
of
would-
cubes. So it would be very, very difficult to try to make our block building system able to build those pieces. So those pieces will be, categorically separate, where it's this is a door. The door takes up a certain dimension, and then it fits into the cube-based
Yeah.
structure.
I want to create a trap, or I want to create a
Yeah. So
what are they called? Murder hole with rocks and stuff, or anything like that.
yeah. So most of those things will be items that you will add to your cube structures in order to give them functionality, like being able to open and close a door.
Not a question, but Rocket Mist says, most game studios that stream on Twitch don't even read the chat. So we appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Let's see. Oh, we have some on the YouTube chat. Anila Gamir asks, will there be spells that affect your hardware, like blind spells that make your screen black? Or confusion spells where your directional keys are messed up?
Typically, those have hacking issues, because on the client you can undo whatever that is. But we've talked about some effects where we want to have like full screen effects to your screen. I'm not a huge fan of the ones that mix up your keybinds, but it's something that we can experiment with at some point and see what they do. Most of the effects, though, are going to have to do with increasing or decreasing the efficiency of the performance of your character, as opposed to making it do wacky things that are messing with the way that you, as a player, actually interact with the control scheme for your character.
Looking for a really great one to end with.
yeah, hit up YouTube, like you were saying. Those guys don't usually get as much love.
That's true. Well, Angel C wants to know about archers. Will arrows be physical objects in your quiver that you can see deplete, like special arrows?
That's a good question. I think we need to figure out what the tech involved in doing that is. I would like to do something where we have different states, so that it may not be every single arrow is actually represented and constantly updated every time you pull it out. This is a guess. We haven't talked too much about this, and we haven't delved into the details of what this would take. But I would certainly love to do something where we have different states of, maybe 175, 50%, 25%, so that you might get some idea of how many arrows a person has in their quiver. But I think there's a bit more of a tech discussion that needs to happen around this.
All right. Are we out of time? Should we
Yeah,
open a
yeah.
A
gift?
couple more YouTubers.
Yeah, more
Mark says
YouTubers?
more YouTubers.
All right, let's see. More questions from the YouTubes. Metsune Games asks, will tanks have taunt-type abilities that force players to keep tanks targeted? Or how do you foresee their usefulness in the realm versus realm fight?
So obviously we've done Mark and I both having worked on Warhammer. In Warhammer and in other games, there have been taunt abilities that didn't actually force lock you into a target, and so I would look at those effects as being more similar to the ones that we're going to have in our game versus the ones where the typical PvE effect, where it basically forces a NPC to attack a given target for a certain amount of time, or just bumps them to the top of the hate list, which players don't have, obviously. So you can look at effects that...
Players will have a different version of a hate list.
Yeah, well...
I know that guy!
That might be...
Developers.
Yeah, that too.
That might be true. But yeah, I would look at more, so if there's going to be effects for fighters specifically to incentivize enemies to attack them, then they would provide damage reduction against other people or damage amplification to themselves at the same time to make them a more preferable target to attacking other players. And so things like that can help direct attacks towards fighters without having a hard requirement of forcing people to change their targets, for example, to force them to attack the fighter for a given amount of time.
Exactly. You throw a debuff, on the fighter, and the only way for that debuff to be removed from the fighter is take out the guy who threw the debuff on him. And if a tank can do that to another tank, well, that's one way to get around the problem. It becomes advantageous to attack the tank.
Just want to make sure. Can you guys hear Mark? Okay. And while you're answering that, Azarin wants to know, since there are dyes, instead of just solid paint, like slapping color on a section of armor, can we have options like dipped in blood or splattered instead of just solid paint?
Oh yeah, that actually rolls into the tattoo idea as well. Basically, tattoos would be the same thing on the character or on the armor. It's just the word usage in this case. The tech would be very similar, if not identical.
We've got another one from YouTube. This is probably a Mark question. How is the budget holding up, and is it sufficient to ensure reaching planned production milestones?
Well, since we haven't laid out any next milestone yet, then the answer is yes. Yeah. Look, if we were stuck developing this game until 2030 and we weren't getting any additional donations, the answer would then be, of course, no. But are we fine to getting the launch based on the schedules we have now? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there you have it. Let's see.
Let's actually get one more for these guys and then get to the gift.
Okay, one more question for these guys, and then we're going to open a gift from backer.
Is it still raining?
A little bit. Andrew had to go home to sandbag his house.
That's a lot of water.
Rain. They're getting a lot of rain there. We're not getting much yet out in Clifton.
Drooged wants to know, will a Veilstorm be able to knock over walls and buildings?
I don't know. I don't know how intense Mark has pictured that.
The answer is maybe, because it really depends on.
I feel like we get lightning bolted or something.
Well, it depends on how big the Veilstorm is, right?
Yeah.
Veilstorms are like any other storm in our world. That sometimes they're really, really bad, and sometimes they're not. Except you throw in magic. So the answer is yes. There'll be some times that it can knock
I can
down
see that happening.
buildings. Most times, no, and it also depends what your building's state is and how it was built.
Yeah, flimsy wood and some entropy void crazy storm hits it. Yeah, we could knock sections out of it.
For gameplay reasons, I think we probably would want to make sure that those have a specific cause.
Correct.
And aren't just random, because
Of
like
course.
randomly things happening in the world that just
sucks.
destroy your house, like that's probably not very fun. But if there's ways that players can like influence these things, then
Correct.
we can maybe look at them being
we've
more
talked
severe.
about that. That's been in the Kickstarter since the beginning.
Yeah.
That if an area becomes either too over magic or other things happen connected with the depths, then something very nasty can be generated. But like almost everything else that we can think of with this game, we want there to be counters, as you say. There are things that you should be able to do against it. No, you can't, do the, I'm just going to pray that it goes away and go away thing. On the other hand, can you use abilities that could weaken it a bit, that could protect your holding more, absolutely.
So maybe a good place to end.
Yeah.
All right. So
Okay.
We're gonna open a gift, and do we actually know who this is from?
I don't. I'm assuming, since I always put my name on things that go here, that typically if it just says city state, it is a gift. So we'll find out if it's a roll of tape or not. Some office supply or something. It is an ice microphone.
Oh my gosh! Somebody send us a better microphone.
Oh, that's awesome.
Gift for you. This mic will improve. Unfortunately, this has been printed. Like part of this is not printed here. This mic will improve something sound and filter out background noise. Poxer.
Oh wow! Thank you.
Thank you
Poxer.
very much.
Thank you, Poxer.
Yeah,
We-
that might help.
We will totally take advantage of this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry, unfortunately, do us a favor. Send maybe if you can remember what you wrote here. Like I said, part of this is cut off just so we can say extra thanks for it.
Yeah, hit me up on Discord, Poxer, so we can get the proper thank you. All right, well, that's it, folks.
It's a snowball ice black.
That's
So-
cool.
Not only is it cool, but it's a snowball and it's black.
So, folks, we'll let you know about fledgling in the next hour. We are in the process of getting it set up now. So as soon as it is up and running and we can jump in and confirm that it's good, if it's good to go, we will have an alpha test this weekend on fledgling, and then next week a big bot test on fledgling.
Week's update, as I mentioned.